So today we got a question from a young guy, 19 years old, and he's wondering, asking me the question, Chewy, is BJJ worth all of the injuries? Now he asks this question because he's been training for a little while, and he's looking around at the older training partners that he has that have been around for a while, and he sees that a lot of them and hears a lot of them talking about injuries they've had. They had surgeries and they have different things going on, and so he's looking at the writing on the wall, right? Because he's at the beginning of his training, and he's looking at the guys that have been doing it for maybe 10, 15, 20 years, and that's what I'm headed towards. And so he wonders, he's like, is this really all worth it? Because these guys have some injuries on them. And he sent me the question about that. And brother, thank you for the question. And, again, I'll sort of show this at the beginning. I don't know. That's subjective to you, right? Whether or not it's worth it. But the people that are training there, they obviously think it's worth it because they kept doing it, right? But I'll give you a couple ideas to chew on. Just something to stew around in your brain a little bit, and hopefully this will help you make your own decision as to whether or not you think it's worth it. So when I think about this question, I've thought about it a lot, because as a guy who's been training grappling for over 2 decades at this point, I've had a few injuries. Less than most, but I've still had a few. And I think about the fact that the body, there's almost like there's a personal history on each one of our bodies. It's etched into our physical being, right? Because when you think about it, so much, we can tell a lot about a person by how they are, right? I mean, for instance, you could probably tell a professional video game player versus a NFL linebacker just by looking at them, right? You could probably look at their bodies and be like, yep, that's the linebacker. That's the guy that sits in a chair and plays games all day, right? Nothing wrong with it. I'm just saying what it is. And then even me, like if you were to talk about injuries, right? Like all over my face, I've got scars here from fighting over the years. My nose is straight now, but it was broken. It was like over here. I've got a mangled ear. I've got these knobby knuckles. Although I suspect that these knuckles that I have, right, that some of you guys have noticed, these were mostly, I think, hereditary. My mom had some knobby knuckles, and she had never done jiu-jitsu in a day in her life. So I think some of it was hereditary. But even this ear, which is kind of, it's an injury, right? It's a deformed ear, right? Some people would look at it and go, oh, it's hideous, right? But for me, I'm like, I like it. And I go into I remember going into a restaurant once, and me and this guy made eye contact with each other. We're both doing this, and we both have ears. We both noticed the ear instantly. We're both like doing this, and I talked to him for a little bit. He was a wrestler, and I'm like, I'm a jiu-jitsu guy, that kind of thing. And so it's kind of cool. And so again, this sort of tells you a little bit about a person, right? It doesn't tell you the whole story, but it gives you an idea as to maybe what that person's been through or done. And I think of it almost like an artifact, like at a museum. So for instance, there's a museum here in town in Louisville that I really like. It's an arms museum, and basically it's just weapons from all across history, from the classical period in Greece to up into like the Middle Ages and everything else. I mean, it just goes on. It's super, super cool. And it shows you these weapons. Now, when you look at these weapons, it essentially gives you like an idea of what was used. It was a tool. It was this, that, whatever. But it lacks color. It lacks the vibrance of what life would have been like, right? One of the pieces that I really sort of sit around and look at sometimes when I go there, there's a spearhead that's dated to around like 490 BC. So this was about the period of time when the Persians were invading Greece early on, right? And I always look at that spearhead and I wonder, I'm like, man, what has that thing seen? Because like, what would have been like for the crafter to hand it off to the hoplite that was going to use it, right? Maybe it was like they know the Persians are invading, and all of a sudden he's handing the spearhead off to take this guy to the battle, right? And then the person that wielded that spear, what did they see? Maybe they were part of the Athenian men that fought at the Battle of Marathon and pushed the Persians back into the sea, right? Who knows? Maybe even that guy that wielded that spear died that day on the battlefield to save his family, right? And you could ask him, hey, was that worth it? I just, these are ideas. I'm a geek. I'm a history geek. So I think about this stuff. And before any of you guys ask, yes, I've listened to Dan Carlin before, and I've been listening to him since back in like 2009. But anyway, I think about that stuff, right? There's the artifact. There's this sort of, it's a history. It's this physical piece of history, but it lacks the color. It lacks the vibrance of life, right? And this is the way, like when you sent your question, when you think about just the injuries, right? Okay. Like for instance, tore meniscus, had to get my nose fixed, tore meniscus again later on, had some other issues, different stuff, mangled ear, chipped tooth, the whole thing, right? We go on. When you look at those, are very like just physical things, just things that happen. But then when you say, well, what are all the other things that I've got? Where's like the actual life part of it, right? And why do I keep training? Because of the community that I've built, the experiences I've had with the people, the sort of feeling that it gives me on a day-to-day basis. I mean, there's a million things that I could go on for hours talking about it, but there's all these experiences and this daily thing that I go through that keeps me doing it and why I think it's worth it, right? And there's probably a reason why all those guys are still on the mat training, even in spite of all those injuries, because they feel like it's worth it. Now, not everybody's going to. It's not for everybody. A lot of people say jiu-jitsu is for everybody. It's not for everyone. There's nothing wrong with that. But for those of us that it's for, right, we find that exchange worth it. Because, again, at the end of the day, man, this bag of bones that we have, it's on lease. We don't get to keep it. And while you don't want to wear down the tread on the tires too soon, you want to have some fun with it. You want to go do something. I don't personally want to walk across the end of my life, right, the finish line of my life and say, man, I have great shoulders and knees and everything feels great. I want to kind of be done. I want to be ready to go. So, that's my idea. And so again, I think the exchange is worth it personally. That said, not everybody does. And that's sort of the subjective nature of it. And so for you, I can't give you a definitive answer, but I can tell you that if you were to speak to those old timers in your gym, instead of just thinking about their injuries and asking them maybe what they've been through and some of the experiences and listening to that side of it, that might give you a better sort of idea as to whether or not it's worth it to those people and whether it might be worth it to you. So anyway, hopefully that's helpful to you, brother. And guys, I'll talk to you next time.